Give it up for Jilliana, thank you.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Oh, yeah. Good evening.
Good evening. This is quite an unusual story. I don't know if it's true, because usually my stories are true. And it's called Andrew's story. True or fiction? We all gathered together for the evening's entertainment, the last night at Cortijo Romero in Orchiva, located in the mountainous Alpujarras in the province of Granada, Andalusia. Each of us were to perform a poem, in my case a spoken word vignette, a song or a piece of music. All 15 of us had our unique talents and were to entertain an audience from both the writing and movement courses of about 40 people. At the end, an impressive, large, commanding, good-looking gentleman got up to speak. Andrew was his name, public school educated and well-spoken. He was on my course run by the playwright Diane Samuels, who turned out to be, I discovered, a third cousin of mine through marriage, coming from Scouslandia. Another creative liverbird like myself. Andrew, always with a book, always with his head in an intellectual book, was very well read and an excellent writer of great depths and imagination. He said in our class he was writing for his grandchildren. In fact, he was always mentioning them, but never his children. We had met the year before in the Rosie Jackson poetry course when he had just retired at 65, having sold his industrial plant for an undisclosed fortune and bought a Harley Davidson to travel around Andalusia on the road to his new-found priceless freedom. His road less travelled, perhaps, or was it? You could tell he had great experience in public speaking just by his confidence and stance. I could envisage him as head of the board, making a speech to his shareholders. Andrew casually leaned against a chair and began his performance, watching his audience attentively. He opened his presentation before his actual story by talking about people with similar disabilities who would stand near to each other in a crowd, having an unsaid silent recognition and making direct eye contact. He gave a couple of examples, and it was obvious to me that he had told his story before, as it had a beginning, a middle, and an unclear, confusing ending, in my opinion, as a writer. Andrew claimed to have had a stammer when he was younger, but I heard no trace of it. I could empathise with that, as I too had suffered from a stammer during my lost years, and for 9 months at least, if not more, had difficulty getting beyond I at the beginning of a sentence. I was fascinated and also by the fact that he spoke projecting his voice without a single He continued on effortlessly to say he was in the Navy as an officer. I don't recall. Anyhow, he was approached by a branch of the Foreign Office to deliver some important documents at headquarters in Serbia, the former Yugoslavia, before the country was divided up. He didn't go into details, which I would have preferred, and made me think afterwards that there were a lot of pieces missing in his jigsaw story. But that was not to be the crux of his captivating story. He was captured in Serbia and the vital British documents confiscated. He claimed he was tortured but did not go into any details. He was then taken into a room with 3 stiff, unflinching military Serbian officers who grilled him. It was unclear if all this happened in English. Was Andrew a British spy? While he was being tortured, he noticed a softer, less aggressive young Serb observing, but who remained silent throughout the drawn-out ordeal. Andrew was immediately sentenced to death, without a trial, hands tied, not handcuffed, but not clear if his hands were behind his back or in front. He would be shot in front of a firing squad the following night. There again he was unclear, but for most of the enthralled listeners, no one would be thinking about the consequences or the smallest details like a writer would. During the interrogation, Andrew's stammer had returned. As he confessed to us, he feared for his life. The next day, Andrew, still with his hands presumably tied, faced the firing squad with a younger Mr. Softly in command, who was to give the final order to shoot. The 2 men faced each other, eye to eye. Mr. Softly shouted, "1!" Then a pause, looking ill at ease. A long drawn out 2, but could not say 3, as he was stammering badly, still looking directly at Andrew, their eyes locked, silently pleading for him to run away into the night. According to Andrew, he escaped in the ensuing... Oh, it's gone off the screen. Oh no! Catastrophe, excuse me. Slight intermission. Andrew, wait a minute, sorry. Get it back. According to Andrew, he escaped in the ensuing confusion through the woods, or was it over a cliff? This bit is not clear, as he spoke rapidly to his audience. He just kept on running, expecting to be shot, but were his hands tied, I asked myself? How did he manage with language in a war-torn country? How did he survive during the complicated and horrific Yugoslavian war and get back safely to England, his mission unfulfilled? Andrew, however, had made his point about the eye contact and empathy. Thus, he left the stage after a rapturous applaud, outshining all us other performers. He was a brilliant storyteller, and he knew it. Outside, by the pool, he was congratulated, surrounded by several enthusiastic, adoring middle-aged women. However, when I tried to ask him a few direct, detailed questions about his escape, he pushed me away irritably. He knew instinctively as a writer that I didn't believe part of his story, or perhaps all of it. He knew as a storyteller myself, I might have hit a nerve. There were pieces in the jigsaw that just did not fit. But what a story! I've never met anyone condemned to death, and I'm sure I never will again. Andrew quickly excused himself from the clawing women and fled into the tranquil night and sanctuary of his room. He had had his moment of glory and was satisfied. It had been a night to remember, past and present. The following morning, after an early breakfast, the previous evening was forgotten as everyone was concentrating on departing from their holistic bubble, going their separate ways, hugging and kissing people goodbye. Smiling, Andrew waved a white handkerchief, but without making eye contact to those of us departing in the departing coach going off to Malaga Airport, standing by his pride and joy, his greatest love, his Harley, and the road less travelled. I, however, never forgot his intriguing story and wonder if his grandchildren will ever hear or read his fascinating, unforgettable story written, true or fiction.